Graduation night was supposed to be the start of my freedom. Instead, it became the night everything shattered. My stepfather's rage, my brother's betrayal, and a locked exit that changed everything. The bruise on my cheek wasn't just a mark, it was the catalyst for my revenge. What he didn't know was that I had inherited more than just my father's eyes. I had his shares in the company, and with them, the power to destroy everything my stepfather had built on lies. My name is Emily Hartman, and until 6 months ago, I believed in the illusion of family harmony. Standing in my cap and gown outside Harrington University's business school, clutching my master's in finance, I should have felt nothing but pride. Instead, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety that always preceded family gatherings. "There's my brilliant stepdaughter," Chuck Whitman's booming voice carried across the courtyard. Charles, he insisted everyone call him Chuck, approached with his trademark politician's smile, the one that never quite reached his steel-gray eyes. At 58, he commanded attention in his tailored suit, every silver hair perfectly placed, every gesture calculated to project success. Behind him trailed Ryan, my stepbrother, scrolling through his phone with practiced indifference. 2 years older than me, Ryan had inherited his father's sharp features but none of his ambition. Why would he need ambition when Daddy's money paved every path? "Congratulations, Emily," Mom said softly, squeezing my hand. She looked beautiful in her navy dress, but I noticed the way she unconsciously stepped back when Chuck approached, the way her smile became fixed and careful. It had been 12 years since she married Chuck. 12 years since we moved into the sprawling Whitman estate in Connecticut. 12 years of watching my mother transform from a confident widow into someone who weighed every word before speaking in her own home. "Top of your class, I heard," Chuck said, his hand landing heavily on my shoulder. To onlookers, it probably seemed affectionate. To me, it felt like a claim of ownership. "Though I still don't understand why you insisted on finance when Ryan could have gotten you a nice position in marketing at Whitman Holdings." There it was, the subtle dig disguised as concern. Everything I achieved was somehow less than what Ryan was handed. My 4.0 GPA meant nothing compared to Ryan's C-average business degree from a school Chuck had donated a library to. "Finance is where the real power is," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Understanding money means understanding everything else." Something flickered in Chuck's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Well, we'll celebrate properly tonight. I've arranged something special at the house, family only." The way he said "family" made my skin crawl. In Chuck's world, family meant control. It meant Ryan getting a corner office at 25 while I fought for unpaid internships. It meant Mom's inheritance from Dad mysteriously becoming tied up in investments that only Chuck could manage. "Can't wait." Ryan finally looked up from his phone, smirking. "Dad's got some big announcement. Something about the future of Whitman Holdings." My stomach dropped. Big announcements in the Whitman household never boded well for anyone without the Whitman name. As we walked toward the parking lot, Chuck fell into step beside me, lowering his voice. "You know, Emily, now that you're graduated, it's time to think about your role in this family. Real contribution. Ryan's been handling the Riverside Development Project, $75 million. That's what I call stepping up." I bit my tongue, knowing that handling meant Ryan signed whatever papers Chuck put in front of him between golf games. "I have several job interviews lined up in Manhattan," I said carefully. Chuck's laugh was cold. "Manhattan? Why would you want to commute when there's perfectly good opportunity right here? Unless," he paused, his tone sharpening, "you're planning to abandon your mother? After everything we've provided?" The accusation hung in the air like a threat. This was Chuck's favorite weapon, guilt wrapped in generosity, obligation disguised as love. Looking at my mother's bent head, at Ryan's entitled sneer, at Chuck's controlling smile, I realized this graduation wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a battle I'd been avoiding for 12 years. Tonight's celebration would be another power play, another reminder of who held the cards in the Whitman family. But Chuck had made one crucial mistake. He'd trained me in finance, taught me to look for weaknesses in every empire. And every empire, no matter how powerful, had a foundation that could crack. The Whitman estate glowed with soft lighting as guests arrived for my graduation celebration. Chuck had invited his business associates, some distant relatives, and a few family friends, all carefully selected to witness what he called Emily's special night. By 10 o'clock, most had departed, leaving only the core family in the mahogany-paneled study. "Now that the pleasantries are over," Chuck said, pouring himself a scotch, "let's discuss your future, Emily." Mom sat rigid on the leather sofa, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Ryan lounged in the wingback chair, still scrolling through his phone with that infuriating smirk. "I told you earlier, I have interviews." "Forget the interviews," Chuck's voice cut through mine like a blade. "I've arranged a position for you at Whitman Holdings, junior analyst, reporting directly to Ryan." The room seemed to tilt. "Reporting to Ryan?" "He's project director for the Riverside development. You should be grateful. It's a generous offer for someone with no real experience." "No real experience?" I stood, anger burning through my carefully maintained composure. "I have 2 internships at Fortune 500 companies. Ryan hasn't worked a day outside of your company." "Watch your tone," Chuck warned, his face darkening. "Ryan is family. He understands loyalty." "You mean he understands obedience?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Chuck's glass hit the table with a sharp crack. "Ellen, talk to your daughter," he commanded my mother. But she only looked at her lap, silent as always. "This is ridiculous," I said, heading for the door. "I'm 26 years old. You can't dictate my life." "You walk out that door. You're walking out on this family," Chuck threatened. "Good," I shot back, reaching for the handle. It wouldn't turn. I pulled harder, panic rising in my throat. The door was locked from the outside. "Ryan," Chuck said calmly, and my stepbrother held up a key, grinning. "You locked me in?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "We're having a family discussion," Chuck stood, advancing toward me. "And you're going to listen. You live under my roof, eat my food, spent my money on that fancy education. You owe this family—" "I owe you nothing." The years of suppressed rage erupted. That fancy education was partially paid for by my father's life insurance, money that mysteriously disappeared into your investments. "I know what you've been doing, Chuck. I've seen the statements." The silence was deafening. Then Chuck moved faster than I expected for a man his size. His hand connected with my cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the study. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my face, tears springing to my eyes not from pain but from shock. In 12 years, he'd never laid a hand on me. The mask had finally slipped. "Chuck!" My mother finally found her voice, jumping up from the sofa. "Shut up, Ellen," he snarled, not even looking at her. His eyes were fixed on me, wild with a rage I'd never seen before. "You ungrateful little—" "Dad, chill," Ryan said, but he was laughing, actually laughing. "Though she kind of had it coming, talking about family business like that." I looked at my mother, begging her silently to do something, anything. She took a step forward, then stopped when Chuck turned his glare on her. "You hit me," I said quietly, steadying myself against the bookshelf. "You actually hit me." "You needed to learn respect." Chuck straightened his tie, composing himself as quickly as he'd exploded. "Now, you'll take the position at Whitman Holdings. You'll report to Ryan, and you'll be grateful for the opportunity, or you can leave with nothing. No recommendation, no support, nothing. Your choice." The burning in my cheek was nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. Looking at them, Chuck with his cold superiority, Ryan with his entitled amusement, my mother with her learned helplessness, I made a decision. "Unlock the door," I said quietly. Chuck nodded to Ryan, who tossed the key to me with a chuckle. "Smart choice, sis." I unlocked the door, turned back to face them one last time. "You're right, Chuck. I do understand family business, better than you think." As I walked out, I heard Chuck call after me. Be at the office Monday morning, 8 sharp. I didn't answer. I had 3 days to begin dismantling everything Charles Whitman had built on lies and stolen money. The bruise forming on my cheek wasn't just a mark of his violence, it was evidence. And I was very good at collecting evidence. The storage unit hadn't been opened in 3 years. I'd kept paying the monthly fee with cash, knowing someday I'd need what was hidden inside. As the metal door rolled up, dust motes danced in the afternoon light, illuminating boxes of my father's belongings, things Chuck had deemed worthless after Mom remarried. My father, Robert Hartman, had been a real estate developer before the car accident took him when I was 14. Chuck had swooped in 2 years later. The grieving widow and her daughter, perfect targets for a man who specialized in acquisitions. I pulled out the old filing cabinet, my hands shaking as I found the folder marked Whitman Partnership. Dad had been thorough, keeping copies of everything. As I read through the documents, the full picture emerged, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Before his death, my father had been Chuck's business partner. They'd founded Whitman Holdings together, 60% Chuck, 40% Dad. But after the accident, Chuck had presented Mom with papers showing Dad had sold his shares back to the company for a fraction of their value, supposedly to cover bad investments. Except here was the original partnership agreement, and here was Dad's will, clearly stating his shares should go to me when I turned 25. I'd turned 26 2 months ago. My hands trembled as I found the smoking gun. A valuation report dated 1 week before Dad's death, showing his 40% stake was worth $32 million. The papers Chuck had shown Mom claimed Dad sold everything for $2 million, which conveniently covered exactly the amount of the fictional bad investments. But there was more. A handwritten note in Dad's writing. Chuck getting aggressive about buyout, refused offer 3 times, keeping all documents in case of legal action. He says I'll regret not selling. I photographed everything with my phone, then found a flash drive in Dad's desk drawer and uploaded the images. The metadata would prove these documents predated any of Chuck's forgeries. Back at my apartment, I called Diane Morrison, my securities law professor from Harrington. Emily, congratulations on graduation. How can I help you? Professor Morrison, I need a referral for a forensic accountant and a corporate lawyer who specializes in fraud cases. There was a pause. That's quite specific. Are you in trouble? No, but someone else is about to be. She gave me 2 names, then added, Emily, be careful. Corporate fraud cases can get ugly, especially when family is involved. If only she knew. I spent the weekend building my case. The bruise on my cheek had turned purple-blue, and I documented it with photos from multiple angles. I also typed up a detailed account of the assault, noting the date, time, and witnesses present. Sunday night, I accessed Whitman Holdings' public filings online. Chuck had been sloppy, probably believing no one would ever look too closely. The company structure had changed dramatically after Dad's death, with new offshore subsidiaries appearing in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. Then I found it, in the annual report from 5 years ago, buried in a footnote about acquired assets. The company had absorbed formerly partnered holdings valued at $32 million, exactly the amount Dad's shares had been worth. Chuck had stolen my inheritance and had the audacity to report it as an acquisition. I cross-referenced the dates. The forged sale documents were dated 2 days after Dad's death, but the acquisition wasn't recorded until 6 months later, after Chuck had married Mom. He'd waited until he had legal influence over us before formalizing the theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Dad says don't be late tomorrow. Your desk is ready, right outside my office, like a good little assistant. I smiled grimly, typing back, wouldn't miss it for the world. Let them think they'd won. Let Chuck believe his violence had broken me. Let Ryan enjoy his moment of superiority. Tomorrow, I'd walk into Whitman Holdings not as their victim, but as their largest individual shareholder. I just needed to prove it. I opened my laptop and began drafting emails to the lawyers Professor Morrison had recommended. Subject line, urgent, corporate fraud and stolen inheritance case. Then I created a new encrypted cloud storage account and uploaded everything. Dad's documents, Chuck's public filings, the photos of my bruised face, and a timeline showing how the fraud had unfolded over 12 years. The final item I uploaded was a document I'd found in Dad's personal effects, a letter to me, to be opened on my 25th birthday. I'd never seen it because Chuck had hidden Dad's belongings in the estate's old wine cellar, claiming they'd been destroyed in a flood. "My dearest Emily," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to protect you and your mother. The shares in Whitman Holdings are your security. Never let Chuck convince you otherwise. He's a dangerous man when cornered. Trust your instincts. Love, Dad." He'd known. Somehow, my father had known what Chuck was capable of. Tomorrow, Chuck would learn what I was capable of. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied the 40th floor of a Manhattan high-rise. I sat across from Daniel Cross, studying the man who might be my greatest ally or biggest disappointment. Mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, tired eyes that sharpened when I mentioned Whitman Holdings. "You were their chief legal counsel until 2 years ago," I said. "Why did you leave?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "I didn't leave. Chuck fired me when I refused to sign off on some questionable offshore transactions. Claimed I was no longer aligned with company vision. Would you be willing to help expose him?" "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to ask that question." He leaned forward. "But Chuck has the best lawyers money can buy. What makes you think you can take him down?" I placed the partnership documents on his desk. His eyes widened as he read. "Jesus Christ, you're Robert Hartman's daughter? I drew up his will myself. Chuck told everyone Robert had revised it before his death, sold his shares back to the company." "He forged everything," I said, "and I can prove it." Daniel was already pulling out legal pads, his exhaustion replaced with energy. "The statute of limitations on fraud in New York is 6 years from discovery, not commission. Since you just discovered this, we're well within the window." "There's more," I said, showing him screenshots of Whitman Holdings' recent filings. "These offshore accounts, they're washing money through the Riverside Development Project. Ryan's signature is on everything." Daniel whistled low. "Ryan's an idiot. Chuck's been using him as a cutout. Probably promised him the company someday." He pulled up files on his computer. "I kept copies of everything before Chuck fired me. Called it my insurance policy." The screen filled with spreadsheets, emails, and contracts. "Here, look at this. 3 months before your father died. Chuck tried to force a buyout. Robert refused. Chuck threatened to dissolve the partnership and start a competing firm. Could he have done that? Not legally. The partnership agreement had ironclad non-compete clauses. The only way Chuck could get full control was if Robert sold or..." Daniel trailed off. "Or died," I finished. "I'm not suggesting..." "You don't have to." I pulled up the police report on my tablet. "Single car accident, brake failure, no mechanical inspection ever ordered, case closed within a week." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Emily, if we pursue this, Chuck will destroy you. He'll use every connection, every resource." "He already hit me," I said, showing him the photos of my bruised face, "and locked me in a room when I tried to leave. He thinks violence and money make him untouchable." "You documented this?" "Everything. Date, time, witnesses." Daniel stood, pacing to the window. "We'll need more than documents. We need someone inside Whitman Holdings feeding us real-time information." "I start working there tomorrow. Chuck thinks he's broken me." "That's insane. He'll be watching your every move." "Let him watch. He put me under Ryan, remember? Ryan, who's too lazy to lock his computer, who keeps passwords on sticky notes, who brags about deals after 3 drinks. Daniel turned, studying me. "You've thought this through." "I've had 12 years to think about it. I just needed the proof." I stood, gathering my documents. Chuck made 2 mistakes. First, he kept Dad's papers instead of destroying them. His ego needed trophies. Second, he trained me in finance, teaching me exactly how to follow money trails. "What do you need from me?" "Build the legal case. I'll get you the evidence. Chuck's been laundering money through Riverside. I saw the signs in the public filings, but I need internal documents to prove it. Daniel handed me a business card with only a phone number. Burner phone. Text me from a number Chuck doesn't know. And Emily? He paused. Your father would be proud. Robert was the smartest man I knew. But you might be smarter. That evening, I received an email from forensic accountant Professor Morrison had recommended. Margaret Wu. Her analysis was damning. Based on preliminary review, approximately $18 million in Riverside project funds cannot be accounted for through legitimate expenses. This appears to be systematic fraud. I forwarded everything to Daniel with a simple message. The foundation is cracking. His reply came quickly. Monday morning, you walk into that building as a spy. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment. Chuck's paranoid. One slip and he'll know. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise was fading but still visible under makeup. Tomorrow, I'd smile at Chuck, thank him for the opportunity, and begin dismantling his empire from within. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Please come to work tomorrow. Chuck is giving you a second chance. Don't waste it. Even she didn't understand. This wasn't a second chance. It was Chuck's first mistake in a game he didn't know we were playing. I opened my laptop and created a detailed plan for the next 2 weeks. Every file I'd need to access, every conversation I'd need to overhear, every mistake Ryan would inevitably make. The Whitman empire would fall, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with 1,000 small cuts, each one precisely placed. By the time Chuck realized what was happening, it would be too late. Monday morning arrived gray and humid. I dressed carefully. Conservative blazer, minimal makeup that still showed a hint of the fading bruise, hair pulled back in submission, the perfect image of a broken daughter coming to heal. Emily! Chuck's voice boomed across the Whitman Holdings lobby. Right on time. That's what I like to see. He gripped my shoulder, steering me toward the executive's elevator. Several employees watched, and I let them see me flinch slightly at his touch. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Ryan's waiting in his office, Chuck said as we rode up. The Riverside project is our biggest venture yet, $75 million in development costs, but the returns will be spectacular. I'm grateful for the opportunity, I said quietly, keeping my eyes down. Chuck's reflection in the elevator doors showed satisfaction. That's the attitude I wanted to see. Saturday night was unfortunate, but families have disagreements. The important thing is moving forward. Moving forward, as if he hadn't assaulted me 3 days ago. Ryan's office was exactly what I'd expected. Oversized, underutilized, with a putting green in the corner and a bar cart that probably saw more action than his desk. He was playing golf on his phone when we entered. About time, Ryan said without looking up. Dad, I've got the Riverside presentation at 2. Emily can handle the prep work. Chuck clapped Ryan on the shoulder with actual affection, something I'd never received. That's my boy. Teaching delegation already. After Chuck left, Ryan finally acknowledged me. Your desk is outside. Password for the system is on a post-it. Don't embarrass me. The post-it read, Ryan Dow 2025. I nearly laughed. I'll need access to the Riverside files to prepare your presentation, I said. Whatever. Everything's on the shared drive. Just make me look good. I settled at my desk, a cramped space that was clearly meant to humiliate, but Ryan had unknowingly given me exactly what I needed: system access and solitude. The Riverside project files were a goldmine of fraud, shell companies invoicing for services never rendered, contractors billing triple for materials, and a series of payments to consultants who didn't seem to exist. Ryan's digital signature was on every authorization. I worked diligently on his presentation while copying everything to an encrypted flash drive hidden in my blazer lining. By lunch, I'd found the Smoking Gun, a subsidiary called Riverside Holdings LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands, had received $18 million development costs that never appeared in any construction budgets. How's the presentation coming? Ryan lounged in my doorway, golf club in hand. Almost done. You'll look brilliant, I said, pulling up the slides. Though I noticed some discrepancies in the contractor payments. Dad handles all that financial stuff, Ryan interrupted. I just approve what he tells me to. That's why we have people like you, to make it look pretty. People like you. I smiled tightly. Of course. That afternoon, I attended Ryan's presentation, watching him stumble through slides he'd never reviewed, taking credit for work he didn't understand. The board members nodded politely, but I saw CFO Marcus Webb frowning at the numbers. After the meeting, I approached Marcus carefully. Mr. Webb? I'm Emily Hartman, new analyst on the Riverside project. Hartman? Any relation to Robert? My heart skipped. My father. Marcus's expression softened. Robert was a good man. Best partner Chuck ever had. Though he'd never admit it, he studied my face, noting the fading bruise I hadn't fully concealed. How are you finding the work? Educational, I said carefully. The Riverside project is complex. Complex, Marcus repeated the word thoughtfully. Yes, it certainly is. If you ever have questions about complexity, my door is open. A lifeline, perhaps, or a test from Chuck. That evening, I stayed late, using Ryan's credentials to access deeper financial records. The pattern was clear. Chuck had been siphoning money for years, using Ryan as the unwitting signatory. Every fraudulent transaction traced back to accounts only Chuck controlled, but Ryan's name was on everything. Working late on your first day? I jumped. Chuck stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights. Just wanting to do a good job, I said, closing my screens casually. He moved into the office, too close. You know, Emily, I've been thinking, maybe I was too harsh on Saturday. You're smart, capable. You could go far here, if you're loyal. I understand loyalty, I replied. Do you? He picked up a framed photo from my desk, one of Mom and me. Your mother certainly does. She knows what happens to people who aren't team players. The threat was clear. I swallowed my rage and nodded. Good talk, Chuck said, setting down the photo. Don't stay too late. Ryan needs you sharp tomorrow. After he left, I texted Daniel from my burner phone. Jackpot, 18 million traced, need 2 more days. His reply, be careful, FBI contact ready when you are. 2 more days of pretending to be broken. 2 more days of Ryan's condescension and Chuck's threats. But I had what I needed, proof that would destroy them both. I looked at the photo Chuck had touched, Mom's worried face frozen in time. Soon, I promised her silently, soon you'll be free too. Thursday morning, everything was in place. Daniel had coordinated with FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen. Margaret Wu had completed her forensic analysis, and I had uploaded 23 gigabytes of incriminating documents to secure servers. The timer was set. At 9 a.m., while Ryan was at his weekly golf lesson and Chuck was in a board meeting, I made one final sweep of the Riverside files. That's when I found it. An email thread between Chuck and an unknown address discussing insurance on my father's life, dated 2 weeks before his accident. My hands shook as I forwarded it to Daniel. At 10:30 a.m., the first domino fell. Marcus Webb burst into the boardroom, laptop in hand, his face pale. Through the glass walls, I watched him gesturing frantically at his screen. Chuck's confident posture crumbled as he read whatever Marcus was showing him. At 10:45 a.m., the second domino. The receptionist's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Whitman Holdings, please hold. Whitman Holdings, please. She looked overwhelmed as every line lit up simultaneously. At 11 a.m., the third domino. Breaking news alert on my phone. FBI raids Whitman Holdings offices in financial fraud investigation. 18 million in question. Ryan came running from the elevator, still in his golf attire, phone pressed to his ear. Dad? Dad? What's happening? There are news vans outside. Chuck stormed out of the boardroom, his face purple with rage. His eyes found me immediately. You, he snarled, crossing the floor in 3 strides. What did you do? My job, I said calmly, standing from my desk. I analyzed the financial documents, just like you asked. Mr. Whitman? A woman in a dark suit appeared behind him, FBI badge visible. Agent Sarah Chen. Though Chuck didn't know we'd been corresponding. I'm going to need you to step away from Ms. Hartman. This is my company. Currently under federal investigation. Step away, sir. Chuck backed up, his eyes never leaving mine. You have no idea what you've done. Actually, I do. I pulled out my personal laptop, showing him a screen. Whitman Holdings stock is down 30% in the last hour. The SEC has frozen all company accounts pending investigation. And that Cayman Islands subsidiary? It's been red flagged by the Treasury Department. Dad? Ryan's voice cracked. What's she talking about? Your son has been signing fraudulent documents for 3 years, Agent Chen informed Chuck. Though our investigation suggests he may have been unaware of their true nature. Ryan went white. What? No, Dad told me. Shut up, Ryan, Chuck roared. But Ryan was panicking now. He said it was all legal. He said it was just tax optimization. I didn't know. Mr. Ryan Whitman, Mr. Charles Whitman, we need you both to come with us for questioning, Agent Chen said. This is entrapment, Chuck pointed at me. She's setting us up. She's trying to steal the company. The company that was 40% mine to begin with, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The shares my father left me that you stole after his death? The office had gone silent, everyone watching. You want to talk about theft, Chuck? Let's talk about the $32 million in shares you forged documents to steal. Let's talk about the fake bad investments you invented to defraud my mother. Let's talk about that insurance policy on my father's life that paid out 2 weeks after his brake failure. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to, I said. The FBI will. They're very thorough. Chuck lunged toward me, but 2 agents immediately restrained him. As they pulled him back, he shouted, You destroyed your own family. Your mother will have nothing. My mother will have her freedom, I replied, and I'll have my father's company back. They led Chuck away in handcuffs, the entire office watching in stunned silence. Ryan followed, babbling about cooperation and lawyers, his designer golf shoes squeaking on the marble floor. Marcus Webb approached me slowly. You're Robert's daughter, through and through. He'd have done the same thing. You knew? I suspected. Chuck was always too eager after your father's death, too prepared, but I had no proof. He paused. The board will meet emergency session tomorrow. With Chuck and Ryan under investigation, we'll need new leadership. I own 40% of this company, I said. My father's shares, illegally transferred, but still technically mine according to his will. Marcus smiled slightly. I'll make sure the board knows that. By evening, the story was everywhere. Whitman Holdings CEO arrested in massive fraud scandal. Heir apparent Ryan Whitman claims ignorance in $18 million scheme. Whistleblower reveals decade of corporate deception. Daniel called from his office. The FBI has everything. Chuck's looking at 20 years minimum. Ryan might get 5 if he cooperates. And the company? You're the largest individual shareholder once your father's stake is restored. The board will have to listen to you. I stood at the window of what had been Chuck's office, looking out at the city lights. On the desk was a photo from 12 years ago. Chuck's wedding to my mother, Ryan smirking beside him, me trying to smile while feeling my world shift. Tomorrow, the board would meet. Tomorrow. I'd walk into that room not as Emily Hartman, the stepdaughter forced into submission, but as Emily Hartman, rightful heir to 40% of Whitman Holdings. The empire Chuck built on lies and theft would become something better, something my father would have been proud of. My phone buzzed. Mom. I saw the news. I'm so sorry. Emily, I should have protected you. I texted back, You're free now. We both are. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the Whitman estate. Chuck had demanded it through his lawyer, claiming he could explain everything. The board reluctantly agreed. He was still technically CEO until formally removed. I arrived early, finding Mom in the living room, She looked older, fragile, but there was something different in her eyes, a spark that had been dormant for years. "He's upstairs," she said quietly. "His lawyer got him released on $5 million bail. Ryan, too." "Are you okay?" She touched my face gently, where the bruise had finally faded. "I should be asking you that. All these years. I let him—" "You survived," I interrupted. "That's what matters." Board members began arriving, their faces grim. Marcus Webb nodded at me, while others avoided eye contact, unsure where their loyalties should lie. The study, the same room where Chuck had hit me a week ago, had been arranged with a conference table. Chuck entered like he still owned everything, his lawyer trailing behind. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, but his arrogance remained intact. "Gentlemen," he began, ignoring the two women on the board, "this is a misunderstanding orchestrated by a vindictive stepdaughter who—" "Mr. Whitman," board member Patricia Hayes interrupted. "We've seen the FBI's preliminary findings. $18 million is not a misunderstanding." Ryan slumped in his chair, avoiding everyone's gaze. His lawyer had clearly told him to say nothing. "I built this company." Chuck slammed his hand on the table. "Every contract, every deal, every success came from my leadership." "With my father's money and connections," I said, standing, "which you stole after his death." "You can't prove—" I placed a thick folder on the table. Dad's original partnership agreement, his will, leaving 40% to me, the forged documents you created, the valuation report showing his shares were worth $32 million, not the $2 million you claimed, and this, I pulled out the final document, an email thread discussing an insurance policy on my father's life, 2 weeks before his accident. The room went silent. "That proves nothing," Chuck said, but his voice wavered. "Maybe not murder," I agreed, "but it proves motive, combined with the fraud, the money laundering, the falsified documents. You're finished, Chuck." Patricia Hayes cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitman, the board has already voted. You're removed as CEO. Effective immediately. Your shares will be liquidated to cover the company's legal costs and settlements." "You can't do this." "We can and we have," Marcus said. "Emily Hartman's 40% stake, illegally hidden but legally valid, makes her our largest shareholder. The board recommends she take an active role in restructuring." Chuck turned to my mother, desperate. "Ellen, please, tell them this is wrong. We're family." Mom stood slowly, walked to Chuck, and spoke clearly. "We were never family. You were a prison, and Emily just set us free." Chuck's face contorted with rage. He lunged across the table at me, but Ryan, surprisingly, grabbed his father's arm. "Stop, Dad. Just stop." Ryan's voice broke. "It's over. We lost. You lost. You told me everything was legal, that we were just being smart, but it was all lies, wasn't it?" Chuck shook him off. "You ungrateful?" "I'm going to testify," Ryan announced, his voice stronger. "Full cooperation with the FBI. Maybe I was stupid. Maybe I was lazy. But I won't go to prison for you." The betrayal in Chuck's eyes was almost pitiful. Almost. "Ms. Hartman," Patricia Hayes addressed me. "The board would like to offer you the position of interim CEO while we rebuild. Your forensic work uncovering this fraud was exceptional." "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I recommend Marcus Webb as CEO. He's been here 20 years and has the experience needed. I'll take a board position and oversee financial restructuring." Marcus looked surprised, then grateful. "That's very generous, Emily." "It's what my father would want," I said. "A clean company run by good people." Chuck was escorted out by security, still shouting threats about lawsuits and revenge. Ryan followed, head down, looking like a lost child finally understanding the cost of willful ignorance. As the board members filed out, discussing emergency procedures and press releases, Mom and I stood alone in the study. "You could have taken everything," she said. "I took back what was ours," I corrected. "That's enough." She hugged me then, really hugged me, for the first time in years. Your father would be so proud. That night, I received a text from Daniel. Chuck's bail revoked after threatening federal witnesses, meaning you. He's being held until trial. Ryan's cooperating fully. Looks like 25 years for Chuck, possibly 3 for Ryan with his plea deal. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city. The Whitman name would be mud within a month. The estate would be sold to pay legal fees, and Chuck would spend his remaining years in federal prison. But Whitman Holdings would survive, rebuilt on the foundation my father had envisioned, honest, profitable, and clean. The bruise on my cheek was gone, but the memory remained. Chuck had thought violence and money made him untouchable. He'd learned too late that the truth, properly deployed, was the most devastating weapon of all. My phone rang. Marcus Webb. Emily, the press wants a statement. What should I tell them? I thought for a moment. Tell them that Whitman Holdings is under new leadership, committed to transparency and ethical business practices. Tell them the company my father co-founded will honor his legacy. And about Chuck? Tell them justice is being served. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was packed. Chuck Whitman, once the untouchable king of real estate development, sat in an orange jumpsuit, his empire reduced to newspaper headlines and court documents. I sat in the gallery between Mom and Daniel Cross, now Whitman Holdings' chief legal counsel, across the aisle. Ryan fidgeted in his cheap suit, his assets frozen, his trust fund gone, working as a grocery store clerk while awaiting his own sentencing. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Martinez asked. We have, Your Honor. On the count of wire fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of money laundering? Guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud? Guilty. 23 counts in total. 23 times the word guilty echoed through the courtroom. Chuck's jaw tightened with each pronouncement, his hands gripping the defense table until his knuckles went white. Judge Martinez's voice was stern. Charles Whitman, you have been found guilty on all counts. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution of $48 million. Chuck finally looked back at me, his eyes full of hatred. I met his gaze steadily, feeling nothing but closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Ms. Hartman, how does it feel to see your stepfather convicted? Justice isn't about feelings, I said into the microphones. It's about truth. For 12 years, Charles Whitman built an empire on lies and theft. Today, the truth won. What about your stepbrother? Ryan was being led to a separate car, his sentencing scheduled for next week. He'd likely get 3 years, maybe less with good behavior. He caught my eye and, surprisingly, nodded. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement. 3 weeks later, I stood in my father's office, now mine, at the newly renamed Hartman Webb Holdings. Marcus and I had decided to honor both founding partners in the company's fresh start. The walls displayed new photos, Dad's original building designs, the company's first successful project, and a team photo from before everything went wrong. Margaret Wu knocked and entered. Final forensic report. We've recovered another $12 million from the offshore accounts. Distribute it to the employees' pension fund that Chuck had been skimming from, I instructed. All of it? Every penny. Mom appeared in the doorway, looking younger than she had in years. The divorce had been finalized while Chuck was in custody, and she'd returned to using her maiden name, Ellen Mitchell. I'm heading to lunch with some friends, she said, smiling. Real friends, not Chuck's business contacts. After she left, I pulled up the company's latest figures. Stock prices had recovered and surpassed previous highs. The Riverside project, restructured and legitimate, was actually turning a profit. We'd hired back the employees Chuck had fired for asking questions, and morale was the highest it had been in years. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, then read, Emily, this is Ryan. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I was complicit in my weakness and greed. But I wanted you to know. I told the FBI everything, including things about Dad you didn't know. He had files on everyone. Blackmail material. You weren't his only victim, just the strongest one. I'm sorry for everything, R. I deleted the message. Some bridges were meant to stay burned. That evening, I walked through Central Park, thinking about the last 6 months, the investigation, the trial, the complete dismantling of Chuck's empire. It had all happened so fast, yet felt like a lifetime. My phone rang. Daniel. Emily, thought you should know. Chuck's lawyer filed an appeal. Let him, I said, watching joggers pass by. He can file all the appeals he wants from federal prison. The evidence is insurmountable. You're not worried? No, I said, and meant it. I spent 12 years being afraid of him. Fear gave him power. The truth took it away. Your father would be proud, Daniel said softly. I know. I hung up and continued walking, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, Chuck was eating prison food, wearing prison clothes, living by prison rules. Ryan was bagging groceries, learning what real work meant. Mom was laughing with friends, free from the golden cage she'd been trapped in. And me? I was exactly where I needed to be, not running the company as some might have expected, but helping rebuild it into something worthy of my father's name. The 40% stake made me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that truth had prevailed. The bruise on my cheek had long since healed, leaving no scar, but the lesson remained. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't dramatic or violent. Sometimes it's simply showing someone that their actions have consequences, that their victims can become their reckoning. Chuck had thought graduation night broke me. Instead, it had set me free. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this revenge tale, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on Emily's journey. What would you have done in her situation?